Pact, Chapter 1, Bonds. There was a car, my parents' or my uncle's no doubt, parked in the middle of the gates at the foot of a long driveway leading up to Hillsglade House. Symbolic, really, of everything that had gone on for most of my life. Symbolic of everything I had walked away from. My uncle, I was guessing it was my uncle, had parked the car at the entrance of the driveway to force everyone else to find a place to park. I looked down the length of street. The property was framed by a short stone wall, shoulder height, along with an elaborate iron fence of roughly the same height, shaped into curling vines with metal points at set intervals. It had been covered in some black paint or coating, but rust and peeling paint made for a mottled texture. No parking signs, a good distance in every direction. I was already regretting coming. Damn me, I thought, not for the first or second time. Further down the street, a few of the locals had stopped on a corner to talk. Odd how they kept looking at me. Their eyes on my back, I pushed my motorcycle, guiding it through the gap between car and fence. I set it on the lawn, leaning against the inside of it. I wasn't in a rush. I'd made promises to myself. I wouldn't get caught up in their tempo. Taking my time, I removed my helmet, wiped the sweat from my forehead and scalp. Putting my hands in my pockets to be sure I had my keys, I felt paper crumple. I went through my pockets, sorting out the change, bills, and receipts I'd hastily pocketed at a rest stop along the way. Procrastinating. Looking up at the namesake hill of Hillsglade House, I could see it. Not a big house, but it drew attention because of the way it looked down on the two-theater podunk town. It wasn't dark, and it wasn't ominous. Barring a slightly overgrown garden, trees that had grown well beyond the quaint, tidy little decorations they might have been when the house was built, and the railing, it was nothing more than a nice house. I dated a wannabe architect at one point, a brief-lived fling. I didn't remember much, but I didn't feel confident labeling the place as Victorian. 3 stories, with a one-room tower standing 1 floor higher off to one corner. Gray-painted wood siding, decorative lace in carved wood beneath the eaves and around the railing on the porch. Tall, narrow windows with open shutters. I pulled off my jacket, then my sweatshirt. Unlocking and lifting the seat of the motorbike, I retrieved the shirt I had stowed away. Leaving the other clothes behind, I buttoned up the shirt over a black t-shirt while I made my way up the driveway. If my uncle had parked nearer to the house, he could have spared himself and his family the walk, but no, the inconvenience he could pose to everyone else was apparently the top priority. I wasn't surprised. I would have been stunned if there hadn't been anything like this. My boots were heavy on the floorboards of the house as I approached the front door. I stopped to wipe them on the doormat. No welcome was printed. Instead, there were stencil images of roses and thorny stems, as well as the initials R.D.T. It fit somehow. No consideration to the guests, only self-aggrandizement. The door was unlocked. I kicked off my boots and made my way past the front hallway and into the actual house, tucking my shirt into my jeans as I went. My lingering impressions of the house were soon banished. Only a house. Books lined shelves in nearly every room with an available wall, some old with cracked spines, some new, recent bestsellers. It was all sorted more like a library than a home, clearly by some arrangement of age and alphabetized. Anachronistic. That was a good word to describe it. Old and new. A box of colorful cereal sat between the toaster and television in the kitchen across from a small table with a crimson lace-edged tablecloth. A litter box, a cat toy. Not a dirty litter box to look at it, which struck me as odd. I couldn't imagine my family had emptied it. It didn't fit them. I reached the end of the hall, and I could hear voices from upstairs. A crowd, angry, not shouting, but saying hard words, loaded words. I sighed, putting my hands in my pockets, and made my way up. Photographs. Not a single family picture, I noticed. Just pictures of nature, blue and green, to contrast the dark lacquered cherry floorboards and furniture, the burgundy curtains. Made for startling intensity, but it was jarring, overly saturated. When I crested the top of the stairs, I saw them. One family, divided into 4 factions, all dressed in black. "Oh my God," Paige said, her eyes going wide. "Prodigal son returns," Paul said. That was the last coherent thing I made out before it devolved into a mess of bickering. 10 to 1, he needs money for drugs. If you want to talk about that sort of thing, Steph, we could talk about Ellie. Fuck you, Irene. Ellie practically spat the response at her aunt. You don't know anything. Hard words. Drawing lines in the sand, driving to establish new ground rules, to hold on to perceived advantages, to garner new ones or strike at weak points. For 3 years, I had been gone. All of this, it had been going on when I left and was continuing now. It never stopped. 9 cousins, spread into 3 camps. Uncle Paul, his ex-wife, and my Aunt Irene. My Uncle Paul had a wealth of kids, 4 by his first wife, 2 by his second. The oldest of my cousins had a child of her own, while his youngest was 12. 6 in all, with Paige and her twin brother Peter in the middle. Those 2 would just be partway into college, I was pretty sure. Paige looked like she wanted to approach me, but doing so meant getting between Uncle Paul and Aunt Irene as they pointed fingers, digging at each other. I just tuned the words out. It had been a while, but I knew this refrain already. Aunt Irene had kids, but I saw only 2. Molly was close in age to me, and I'd known her well once upon a time, but I hardly recognized her now. She was so preoccupied she barely seemed to notice me, her slim fingers twisting into one another in her lap, her leg bouncing a nervous rhythm that her mother tried to still with a touch. Seemed to be rubbing off on her little brother, who was looking equally anxious. They all had brown hair, and Molly was paler than usual, and the black dress she wore only made it worse. Uncle Paul's family, his first wife Stephanie, my Aunt Irene, each with their respective kids. 3 groups, 3 factions. The 4th group would be mine, for lack of a better word. My cousin Paige had recognized me before they did. My parents. They approached, and I saw that my mom was holding a baby, swaddled in a blanket. I wasn't good at judging the ages of babies. I'd left 3 years ago. "Everything all right?" my father asked. "It's all right," I responded, not taking my eyes off the baby. "You're not in trouble?" my mother asked. "No trouble," I said. "You'd be surprised." "Except for leaving to spend the night with friends and never coming back?" my dad asked. I responded with a glare. He changed the topic quickly. "I can't help but notice your tattoos." I looked down. The shadows of my tattoos were visible through the sleeves of my dress shirt. I pressed my sleeve down so it was flat against my arm, making the tattoos clear. "Yeah, watercolor tattoos by friends. Artist friend I owe a lot to offered to outline them, another one inked them. I'd set rules for myself to avoid getting caught up in this energy, yet I was baiting my father. I could see him squirm, wanting to say something. Question was, would he be willing to criticize the tattoos so soon after my homecoming? "What is it?" I asked. "I'm glad you're safe," he said, with almost no effect. "You know I never harbored any ill will." "I know you didn't." I held my tongue before I added anything else. That wasn't ever the problem, was it? I shrugged, my hands in my pockets, and looked at the baby. "So who's this?" "Ivy," my mother said. "She's 1.5. "Hi, Ivy," I said. She responded by pressing her head against our mother's shoulder. "Busy soaking it all in, kiddo, so you've some good stories to tell your therapist 10 years down the line?" "Blake," my dad said, the word a warning. Without looking away from Ivy, I kept my voice calm, the tone almost light, so the vibe wouldn't upset her. "How hard did you look, Dad? Mom?" "I got in touch with some of my old friends, seeing what happened. My friends, the only ones you actually called, said you stopped asking about me after about a month." "You were almost an adult, and the police weren't interested or helpful. We called around trying to figure out where you were staying, but nothing turned up. I'm not sure what we were supposed to do." I smiled a little as Ivy reached out for my offered hand. Her hand curled around my index finger, and I wiggled it, shaking her hand. "Besides, why devote any more attention to your son when you could just start over, have that beautiful baby girl you wanted, right?" "You're quiet," my mother said. "Nothing to say," I replied. Is it okay if I send Ivy some presents for the special occasions, birthdays, Christmas?" "You don't get to pick and choose," my dad says. "Family isn't a halfway thing." "Okay. Never mind then. If it's one or the other, I'm out. Again." "Blake," my father said, raising his voice. Ivy recoiled at the sudden rise in volume, withdrawing her hand from my finger as her face screwed up, tears imminent. Oh, damn it. It's too easy to lash out, to retaliate, to get sucked into this atmosphere. Dad, sorry. Mom, I'm sorry. My bad, Ivy, I said, my voice soft. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past them. I stopped in my tracks as the door opened and Callan stepped out from the nearest room, and Irene's eldest son. A man in white scrubs followed him. Ellie, the man asked. Callan was Irene's eldest, second oldest of the cousins. If Ellie followed after him, then they had to be going down the list, seeing the cousins in order of oldest to youngest. I watched as Ellie stood, looking out of place and deeply uncomfortable in a dress that didn't suit her at all. Her eyes had thick eyeliner, her lips had lipstick too red for her complexion. Her slouched posture and narrow, flat-chested figure evoked mental images of a weasel. She was visibly nervous, but not in the same way that Molly was. The door wasn't the hollow plywood door that you saw in most homes. It was wooden, through and through, and it closed behind Ellie with a heavy thud. No kidding. Blake, Callan asked as I started to walk around him. Hey, I responded. You're wearing jeans? Paint-covered jeans, now. I looked down at the jeans, the lap striped with narrow streaks in various colors, then met his eyes shrugging. Doesn't matter. Why the hell did you come? He asked. Most of us thought you were dead or something. Got a call, I said. I glanced back at my parents. Well, the lawyer found me alive and well without much trouble. I was wondering how the family was doing, and I figured this was maybe the last time we'd all be together. Thought I'd check in, see how things were, say what needed to be said. Now listen here, Blake. If you think you're going to worm your way in... If I was, do you think I'd be wearing these jeans? I asked. More exasperated than anything, I told him, Just buzz off, Callan. Save your energy for attacking the others. I'm a non-threat, I promise. He scowled a little, then summarily walked off. He took a seat on the deacon's bench beside Molly. His hand settled over hers, and he leaned over to murmur in her ear. I made my way out of the small crowd that had gathered around that heavy wooden door. Paige fell into step beside me as I walked to the end of the long hallway. I stopped by the narrow window where the dim light of the setting sun filtered between the curtains and through the shears. Jesus, she said for the second time. Hey, Paige. She reached out, arms extended for a hug, and I flinched. I stepped back and nearly knocked over a picture off the wall behind me as I bumped into it. She looked stricken. Her arms dropped to her side. Her hair was done up in a French braid. She looked as uncomfortable in her clothing as her older sister hadn't. It was how she'd always been. Prim, proper, preppy. She was almost into her 20s now, but I could see where she could easily be at home in the world of ties and pantsuits. No, I said, I'm sorry, it's just reflex. I made myself reach out to hug her. It was clumsy, not natural in the slightest. Her head banged against my ear hard enough to be painful. Her arm squeezed me in excessive care. What happened? She whispered as we parted. I knew what she was asking, but I answered a different question instead. I didn't see any reason to stay, so I left. You ran away. I always think of little kids leaving with a bundle on a stick when I think of running away. I shrugged. The shrug was starting to be habitual, to the point where I felt my attempts to take all of this in stride were more acting than reality. Not a word, not a call, she said. I mean, I know we weren't close, but I thought maybe you'd say something, let me know that you were okay. I didn't make it hard to find me. I figured I'd go back or whatever if anyone bothered enough to track me down, but they didn't, so I didn't. Did you go someplace, or... She trailed off, as if afraid to broach another boundary, as she'd done with a sudden hug. I was on the streets for a bit. It was... Well, I won't lie, it was worse than you think. A bit ago I met people, and I got help. I know how lucky I am that I made it this far. It was odd, talking about it with someone who didn't know the story already. I could see a look in her eyes that I was familiar with. Pity, but not quite pity. An attempt at understanding that couldn't succeed. There was no explaining just how bad it had been without having to explain why I hadn't gone home. Pride of an odd sort that drove someone down instead of raising them up. To distract her, to end that inquisitive look, I commented, Well, I'm doing okay enough that I treated myself to my first big, non-essential purchase. I had to lean against the wall to angle myself so I could see it, leaning against the inside of the fence. I pointed, then stepped out of the way. A bike? And the license and insurance. It's about the shittiest, smallest, cheapest bike ever, and it's used, but that doesn't matter. It's mine. Anyway, what are you up to? University? Yeah, second year. Business, hopefully law, a bit down the road if I can finagle it. She showed me her crossed fingers. You still keep in touch with the people from high school? Shannon? Miracle? Mira, she's finally going by a different name, no longer a testament to why immigrants shouldn't let their kids choose their English names. She still asks about you, you know? At least someone did, I said, smiling a little. Paige looked like she was going to punch me, then stopped short, remembering the issue with the hug. I did, you jackass, Jesus. Molly stood from the bench and approached us. Here we go, Paige said. She smiled, quirking her shoulders even as she showed an uncharacteristic excitement. A little bouncy, even. Us three back together after 9 years? 10, I corrected her. Paige was a year older than me, Molly a year younger. We'd always hung out back in the days when the family had gotten together. Molly didn't look happy, though. She hugged her arms against her body. She still looked almost ill. Hey, you okay? I asked. I just want this to be over, Molly said. She leaned against a doorframe. A moment later, she stood, shifting position, restless. I remember how we used to make up stories about this place, Paige said, gruesome ones. Yeah, Molly said, hugging herself tighter. They weren't all made up, that bit about great-grandpa and great-grandma being related. I shivered a little. Thank you for that reminder. The duel where one of our ancestors murdered someone, Molly asked. Killed, Paige said. I don't think it counts as murder if it's during a duel. Semantics, Molly said. I love arguing semantics, Paige said, smiling mischievously. Don't get me started. The murmur of conversation further down the hallway dwindled. Silence, then the fat sound of footsteps. Ellie making her exit. Paige and Peter, the man in scrubs said. Paige's eyebrows went up. Lumped in with a twin, I noted. Paige forced a smile to her face. I'm just a little terrified. Here goes. Wish me luck. Paige, Molly said. She hesitated. Don't... I can't explain it. It would sound dumb if I did, but don't take whatever she offers you. Paige frowned. Paige, the man in scrubs asked. Peter was standing next to him. Blonde, like Paige, the same height and build, even the same general shape to his face. But when Uncle Paul and Aunt Steph had split up, each one had taken one of the twins. Peter was rougher-edged at a glance, somehow older, and very much like Ellie, who had joined him in going to their mom, and how uncomfortable he looked in more formal clothes. He and Paige entered the oak door together. Molly and I were left alone at the end of the hallway. The volume of conversation in the hallway gradually rose. Whispered words to allies, barbs directed at enemies. When I spoke, my words were closer to a whisper, a murmur. Hey, Mo, what's going on? Don't know if you remember or heard, but my mom moved us here, so we'd be closer, trying to get an advantage. So Callan, me, and Chris, we've been here regularly, usually when Mom invited herself over. Figured it was something like that, I said. I don't think Callan really gets it, but he moved a few years in, and Chris and I have gone to school here. There's a vibe. Too many things that don't fit. Strangers knowing who I am and not liking me right off the bat. Does that make sense? Sure, it's about the property. No, it's more than the property. It's about old ladies glaring at me, kids going after Chris on the playground, and it's too quick and too mean for me to feel like it makes any sense. Feeling like I'm surrounded whenever I'm outside, like a third of the people around here have decided we're their mortal enemies. I could remember my night on the streets, finding a place to set up camp out of anyone else's way. Even with the city lights, it was hard not to feel like danger was lurking just out of sight, waiting until my eyes were closed. In quieter areas where the glow of the city hadn't been there, where deeper shadows could have hidden anything, the feeling had been all the more intense. Twice I had even been right. Both times it had been people. The worst types. I still had scars, some were even physical. I could imagine how Molly might feel facing a watered-down version of the same situation. Being bullied by a whole community, being somewhere where anyone could be hostile without the slightest provocation, being a focus even. I can remember the looks of the people on the corner had given me as I pulled up. You are their mortal enemy, Molly. We are. It's just small town people obsessed over the smallest, dumbest things. This is a big deal to people. When you're alone, feeling vulnerable to begin with, it's scarier. I don't want it to make it out less than it is. That's not what I mean, she interrupted. It's what it is, Molly, trust me. Small communities have done scary stuff before with little rhyme or reason. You're spooked, and you have a reason to be spooked. It's legit. But don't lose sight of the issue at the root of this whole business. She looked so abjectly miserable, standing there, restless and nervous. It's almost over, I tried to reassure her. She started, then she stopped. She glanced back. I'm gonna go sit. I need to get my head clear before my turn comes up. Sure, I replied. I'm really glad you're okay, Blake, she said. She managed a smile. Thanks, I replied. I watched her make her way to the seat. I could feel the anger stirring again. Anger at my uncle and aunts, at everyone, everything here. It got worse instead of better as I waited. When the door opened, both Paige and Peter stepped out. The arguing started immediately. Fuck you, Peter, fuck you, Paige said. Even from the far end of the hallway, there were tears in her eyes. Peter smirked. Hey, I didn't say anything that wasn't true. You don't know anything, you asshole. Fuck you, I needed this. Well, Ellie needs it more. Ellie needs it because she's a fuck-up that hasn't worked a day in her life. I'm gonna go to school. Peter, you make up lies to sink me? You're supposed to be my twin. Her voice went a little shrill at the end there. What, you thought I'd be on your side? You only need money because Paul had too many kids to take care of any of them. Isn't that right, Dad? I think you and Ellie have demonstrated you aren't worth the effort, Uncle Paul said, his voice low. He'd approached Paige, reaching out to put a hand on her shoulder. She stepped away instead. She was crying now. I thought you'd at least play fair, Peter. Maybe you have to be loyal to Ellie because you grew up with her, but I thought you'd be fair with me. We're supposed to have a connection. You hear about twins eating one another in the womb, Peter said. Maybe I got some of your brains, huh? Because that's completely retarded. Paige stared at him, incredulous. Then she slapped him. Hard. It was just the catalyst for this entire thing to become a full-on fight. Not sniping one another, not lacing casual statements with words meant to cut, shouting, Aunt Steph trying to grab Paige and Paige ducking out of reach, running instead. I was already running, myself trying to catch up. The man in scrubs, the bystander, stepped in, getting in my way. He bellowed a single word. Stop! All fell momentarily silent. There was only the sound of Paige's feet hitting the stairs as she made her way down. I made my way through the group, and Molly did too. Molly, the man at the door said. She's asking for you next. Molly and I both stopped. She looked paler than before. Paige was emotionally wounded, Molly deathly afraid, all of the rest of them too, bristling, on edge. It's my turn, I said. I'm Blake Thorburn. Go after Paige, Molly. I don't think I'll be long. Cutting in, Blake? Callan asked. Thought you were lying about not wanting any of this. I just gave him the finger. When I looked, Molly gave me a nod before breaking into a run to chase Paige. The man in scrubs ducked behind the door to say something, then reappeared. She says it's fine, Blake. I made my way into the bedroom, and the door slammed shut behind me, more because of the weight of the solid wood than any intention on my part. Grandmother doesn't look like someone who's about to die, I thought to myself. The room smelled of flowers and fresh air from the windows that opened just above the garden. She had been propped up in a sitting position on her bed, leaning against an arrangement of pillows. She was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown that extended to her broomstick-thin wrists, her hair tied back in a tight bun. Her eyes were sharp as they studied me, and her hands were steady as they raised a teacup to her lips. Her nurse stood to her left in his scrubs. Her lawyer, to her right, was an Indian man in an immaculate suit. Her cat, maybe the largest house cat I'd ever seen, gray and well-groomed, lay with its head in her lap. She studied me, judging me with a cool, calculating gaze. Well, this is refreshing, she finally said. Her voice was clear. Not an old person's voice. Certainly not a 90-year-old's. It feels like all the rest of them are dressed like they can't wait for my funeral. Or maybe they're too cheap to buy 2 outfits for the occasion. With all due respect, I said, picking my words carefully, I really don't give a flying fuck, you disgusting, evil, rancid cunt. I could see the nurse tense, though the lawyer didn't react. The feigned politeness disappeared from my grandmother's face. Again she raised the teacup to her mouth to sip from it. She handed it to the nurse, who turned away very reluctantly to prepare another cup on the trolley beneath the window. Are you done? She asked. I'm thinking both of us are very lucky you have these 2 men here, I said. I put one of my feet up on the wooden chest at the foot of the bed, pointing at the trolley. Because I'm angry enough, I wouldn't be above throwing that pitcher of water in your face. I think that's crude, she said. A more civilized person would use words to attack me. What are words going to matter? What am I going to say that's going to make an impact on you? Honestly, what am I going to do that's going to make you even recognize even an iota of the pain you've caused everyone out there? And the pain I've caused you? She asked. You're most likely right, I suppose. There's very little that someone could say that would shake me. You don't deserve to die with dignity, I said. And none of them are going to say it because you're playing them, and since I'm the only one that doesn't give a fuck about the money, I figure I'm the only one that can come here and say how it is. You're scum, and you're the one thing at the root of everything that's going on out there. I pointed at the door. I could almost hear the shouting on the other side. I would argue they are the roots of their individual problems. I didn't make them petty, and I didn't make them greedy, she said. She sighed a little. This ridiculous money business. You took advantage of those things, making all of this one big fucked up game. Laying down the rule that only one person gets the property and the millions from selling it, then you say it has to be a grandchild. My children are useless, she said. She was so dismissive and casual about it. And then you drop the bomb that it has to be a girl. You broke up this family. You did it strategically. You set us tooth and nail against one another, and now you're enjoying tearing the others down, ruining their hopes. She sniffed, but she smiled. I almost wanted to hit her. I wouldn't, but by God, I wanted to. The nurse handed her a cup of tea. She smiled up at him. Thank you, Rich. Rich turned my way. I can offer you a cup as well if you promise not to throw it at her. Don't offer me anything, then. Thank you, I said. I looked at my grandmother. I don't want anything she has to offer. Not the tea, not the inheritance. To clarify, she said, I've stressed repeatedly that it is a female grandchild that will get the inheritance. I'm not about to rule out the fact you're messing with us, grandmother. I could see you handing something over to Callan just to see our reactions. Not to mention the trouble I'm having with the I'm dying bit, which you're doing a really bad job of selling. Hell, if anything I'd said had an impact, it was that. I could see the faint amusement drop away from her. Are you accusing me of being a liar, Master Blake? I'd never heard anyone say something archly, but she pulled it off. She even said Master Blake, like it was nothing, as though she used titles as a matter of habit. I'm saying there isn't anything I'd put past you. She sighed. A faint sound, and her cat reacted to the movement. Close to the truth, I admit, but I consider myself honest, if nothing else. Weren't you a lawyer? I am a lawyer, Master Blake, and I expect to be one until I pass on. I'm disappointed that you would make assumptions about the whole profession. I didn't have a ready reply to that. I glanced at the nurse, who was shifting from foot to foot nervously. Was he uncomfortable with the friction? Well, she said, I take it you're not going to apologize? You first, I told her. It's going to take you a while. You should start early. She sipped her tea, winced at the heat, licking her thin lips with her tongue, and then leaned back against the arrangement of pillows. You remind me of my father, she said. He had passion, and an interest in justice. He also fucked his cousin, if I remember right. She smiled a little at that. You heard that? Yes, of course, that would be him. What are you doing, grandmother? You want to build a rapport, form a connection when you've ignored us from the beginning? No, I only want to understand my grandchildren before I make my decision. Too bad. You're not going to figure us out in the next day or so. What you should do is sell the property. Let the town knock down the house, level the hill, drain the marshland, and then expand like they need to. Make them happy. Split the money between your kids and grandkids. Make us happy. You want to light a fire under everyone and get a reaction? That's how you do it. Then maybe, just a bit, you'll earn a fraction of the forgiveness. Not an option, she said. She stroked the cat, scratching him at the lowest parts of his back, just in front of his tail. The house stands. I'm picking the young lady who I feel can look after it. Then pick Paige, I said. She's smart, she's hardworking, she's independent. If you're looking for a clone of yourself to inherit the place to look after it, I'm betting she'll fit the bill pretty well. Well, she's not a bitch, but I imagine you'll have to make some concessions. Besides, if anyone can squeeze a few dollars out of this stone without breaking the rules you set, it's her. Get bribes from people, maybe, or figure out a way to keep the house while still draining the marsh so she can go to law school. No, Paige is out of the running, my grandmother said. Who else? I stared at her, brushing aside an argument just like that. You're enjoying this, playing us, I finally said. I wouldn't recommend jumping to conclusions, Blake. Dangerous business. Look me in the eye, then. If you're so honest, and tell me you don't, that you don't get some measure of glee or satisfaction out of this. She looked me square in the eye and didn't say a word. Okay. Thought so, I said. Bye, Grandma. Whenever you do die, I hope it sucks. I turned to leave. Blake, she said. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I regretted the moment I paused. When you first spoke to me, you said all due respect. Did you mean it? I didn't look at her. All due respect, you're a colossal bitch? Yeah, 100%. That said, I opened the door and I slammed it behind me with enough force that pictures rattled on the walls. My family was there, staring. If anyone needs me, I said, very deliberately looking at Paige and Molly, who were standing together at the edge of the group, Molly's arm around Paige's shoulders. I'm going to be outside, by the entrance. I made my way out of the house, down the long driveway, and settled with my back to the wall beside my bike. I couldn't bring myself to nap. A good night's sleep in my place with the doors and windows firmly locked was hard enough. But I dozed, my eyes half open, a bit of burden lifted from my shoulders. End of part 1. It was well after dark when someone stepped outside to talk to me. I closed out of the puzzle game I was playing on my phone. The brightness of the screen made for a dark patch that lingered in my vision as I looked up. 11:58 at night. She wants us all together, Paige said. Do you want to give her what she wants? I asked, not moving. I'd really like some backup, she said. All of her confidence from before was gone. If it's Molly that's picked, then I can't get the support from her, you know? I know, I said. I stood, stretching. I was pretty sure that I'd feel stiffness in a spot or two tomorrow. No explanation needed, I get it. Thanks, she said. When I turned to look, the streets were empty. Odd that I felt like we were being watched. No doubt the entire town was waiting to hear how this played out. We made our way back up the driveway. Wished I had an idea of what to say, but nothing sprung to mind. Paige was too much of a stranger in some ways. 3 years was a long time. This time everyone had gathered in the bedroom. Paige and I joined Molly. The two of them held hands. I have to say, I'm painfully disappointed, my grandmother said. No one had words to reply. Don't worry, the feeling's mutual, I said, because someone had to. My aunts and uncle, along with several of the older cousins, stared at me. Molly, my grandmother said. No, Molly replied. Until you're 25, the estate and all materials herein, my accounts, and all other pertinent materials enclosed in the documents, my grandmother tapped the paper as the lawyer held, will be managed by Mr. Beasley and his firm. For that time period, you retain control over those assets with free access to the full funds, modest as they are, and full access to all things relating to the property, excepting the ability to sell it. When you turn 25, you may do with it as you wish. I don't want it, Molly said, stepping forward. Molly, don't be rash, Aunt Irene admonished her. I don't want it, Molly said again. She grabbed the footboard of the bed. No. Molly, don't be silly. If you don't want any of it, then you remain free to ignore it, my grandmother said. Mr. Beasley, is everything in order? Provisos, follow-up? Everything signed and arranged. My grandmother nodded. Rich, you've been wonderful. I set aside some money already to thank you. The nurse looked stunned. He looked at my family. No, ma'am, it's not allowed. I insist. Take it and give it to a favorite charity, if you must. Even then, he looked a little taken aback. He probably thinks my family's going to come after him if he accepts. She probably plotted this, hurting us by favoring the nurse over us. If Molly doesn't want it, I'll take it, Callan said. She can sign over the rights. Fuck you, Ellie said. Granny, why didn't you pick me? Little Roxanne piped up, the youngest next to my new baby sister Ivy. I felt Paige clutch my hand tight. You okay? I murmured. Grim, her mouth set in a line, eyes on the floor, Paige nodded. "Granny," Roxanne raised her voice more than a little shrill, "you don't love me enough to give me anything?" Nice. So that was her angle. Everyone was making a play, and the youngest of the grandchildren that could speak was making the sweetheart play. Or the entitled brat play, depending on perspective. Misdirected, considering who my grandmother was, but that hardly mattered now. My grandmother hadn't reacted. I frowned. "Blake?" my dad asked. "Where are you staying tonight?" "Going home," I said. "If you want to have a late dinner and stay over—" "No," I said. "I don't want that." "All right," he replied. I watched as the nurse approached the bedside. He touched my grandmother's hand. Things went quiet very quickly. Nurse Rich looked at his watch. 12:02. The arguing had distracted him. The time was off by 2 minutes. My grandmother and the cat lying on her lap were both dead. "I need to go make a phone call," the nurse said. He strode from the room. Silence followed, broken only by the footsteps of the nurse in the hallway and the shuffling of papers as the lawyer put things away in a messenger bag. "Listen," my uncle said, broaching the near silence. "We should have a sit-down, talk about the sale of the property when the time comes, the division of funds—" Aunt Irene barked out a laugh. "Oh, now you talk about dividing up the proceeds. I seem to recall only a few hours ago you told me that it wouldn't work." God, more arguing, more stupidity. Why had I told myself it'd be over? "Get out," Molly said, her voice hard. "You heard my daughter," Aunt Irene said. "Get out. It's her house and her say." "You too," Molly said. "Everyone out." Aunt Irene looked shocked at that. Uncle Paul, for his part, smirked. When I had talked to a friend about what I'd hoped to say, she'd asked me if I'd regret not saying goodbye. Now, in the aftermath of my grandmother's passing, I felt anger more than regret, along with a wish that I'd spend a little more time swearing at her. So much needless stupidity. "She can't kick us out," Uncle Paul said. "We were invited here." "I could call the authorities, Miss Thorburn," the lawyer suggested. "For the time being, I'm at your service." "There wouldn't be a point," Uncle Paul said. "Just go," Molly said. "Go. You're not going to scheme your way into any deals here. You're not going to get some advantage or screw me out of the deal. Not tonight. I'm done talking. I'm done listening. Go and leave me alone. And when you've figured out a plan of attack, run it by the lawyer first, not me." Slowly, the aunts and uncles, my mother and father, and the various grandchildren filtered out of the room. Paige squeezed my hand and then broke contact, leaving the room. "Molly," I said. "Hey." She looked up at me. She looked spooked, even now, pale, vaguely ill, almost as if she were in shock. "Why is the cat dead?" she asked. "I don't know." "Shit, maybe it was dead all along and she was just fucking with us." "I don't think so," she said. "Listen, Molly, family's supposed to support each other. I figured I'd offer some support. I don't have to be anywhere, no obligations. If you're worried about locals giving you a hard time, whatever you need, I can stick around." "Uh-huh," Callan said from the doorway. "Clever bastard, you don't want the property. You want to scheme your way in with whoever else gets the place." "Callan, fuck off," I said. Damn. But I could see the expression on Molly's face change. Doubt. Only a little doubt. "I don't want to deal with any of this, with any of that, of this." "Okay," I said. "The lawyer has my number. Ask him. Get in touch. Anything you need. Okay? Please." She nodded. I was the last one to leave. Molly followed me down and stood in awkward silence as I pulled on my boots. "Bye," I said. "It's good seeing you." "Bye, Blake," she said. The door swung shut, my view of her and the lawyer in the background narrowing, then disappearing entirely. I made my way down the path. My uncle's car pulled out, and I saw the younger kids in the window staring at me. I stopped short as I saw my bike, tipped over in a way that had scraped it hard against the stone wall. Headlight and taillight broken. Trying to think of whether I'd seen any garages nearby or whether they'd even be open at this hour, I started the agonizingly slow journey to downtown of Jacob's Bell. 4 months later. I tossed and turned in my bed, fighting to kick the covers off. It didn't help. I felt a pressure on my chest, pressing me down. My movements were sluggish. I was supposed to be asleep, but this relentless weight pressing in on me from every direction had dragged me from that rest, and it hadn't quite brought me to the point of being awake. I opened my eyes, and I didn't see my bedroom. I could feel my body in one place, sheets still hooked over one foot, chest heaving, and I could see in another. Glances were exchanged down both lengths of the table. On one side, women and girls of varying ages, all blonde, in matching shades of green, white, and blue. On the other, appearances varied. Men and women, old and young. Hair color and appearance varied, but there was little doubt they were a family. "Huh," the man at one end of the table said, a member of the family. "I'd hoped she would slip in her old age. Shame, she made other arrangements." The blonde woman opposite him folded her hands in front of her. That was noteworthy, in scale. Kind of her to point the way, but she never was crude. We'll need to know what she did before we move on. "Agreed," the man said. He opened a pocket watch, glancing inside. "For now, let it be. There's enough at stake here that someone's bound to make a play." The blonde woman nodded. She turned her attention to the pair on either side of her, a blonde girl and a dark-haired boy, reaching out for their hands. "I believe we were to talk about wedding plans." I realized I'd been holding my breath, trying not to be heard. When I did breathe, it was a small gasp, not enough to bring air into my lungs. I closed my eyes, trying to shut it out. When I opened them, I saw a room, everything turned to a right angle. A house, messy, with pizza boxes and garbage here and there. Two 20-something individuals, a boy and girl, approached. Getting so close, their faces filled my field of vision. A lurch, and the view was righted. The metronome. "Something big just happened," the girl said. "Told you, just now, I told you." "Yeah, you've been telling me this for a while now. This doesn't mean we should do anything," he said. "You've got no balls, brother. We should investigate, and just to be safe, we should investigate with weapons in hand." "I don't... No, Ava, this is dangerous. And what? We should ignore it all? It's dangerous. So are we, little brother." "So are we," she said. She opened the ledge beneath the living room window, hefting a crossbow. She threw it at him. "Jesus," he shouted. "Ava!" "It's not loaded, you dink," she said. She picked up a revolver, then spun the chamber. "What should we bring? Silver bullets, inscribed bullets, incendiary?" "Iron," he responded, a little sullen. "Cold forged. Bone, paper, every other follows a different rule. What looks like a goblin could be a demon, or a wraith, or a glamour. I mean, you remember those vampires from out west? The fairy? Yeah, sure. You're not getting what I'm saying, sis. If they can fool themselves into thinking they're vampires and believe it to the point it becomes sort of true, sparkly skin aside, then they can fool us. You see, exactly this is what bothers me about all this. You can't make any guarantees. You can't slap on labels. That's why we call them others. You can't plot. We can try. And if we can murder self-deluding fairy, we can murder whatever this is. Even if it's human. You weren't supposed to be the smart one in this partnership. Or rather, you are supposed to be the smart one. I get confused. Anything can knock the metronome over isn't human anymore, or it won't be for long. So let's assume I'm going out anyways. What do I need? He sat down, leaning back, and sighed heavily. "Bring everything. Might as well bring me." "Now we're talking," Ava said, smiling. I turned my head and gripped the mattress. Like someone trying to come up for air, I pushed myself to an upright position. Still, I couldn't see. When my vision started to clarify, it was a third, different location, outdoors this time. "What the drat was that?" a girl asked. She stood in a snowy field, her checkered scarf frozen hard where the moisture of her breath had crusted and solidified. It felt like something moved. "Someone moved," a young man responded. "Come on now, you know better. Everything has a price when we are dealing with this world, Maggie. Even answers to stupid questions." "Right, thanks," she said. "I'll figure it out myself, Padraic. I hope it's a new guy. Be nice not to be the rookie on the block." "Funny thing, Maggie," Padraic said, and when he smiled, the expression extended further than it should have. His smile too wide, the eyes too long and narrow. When something momentous occurs, it can be the equivalent of lighting up the night sky, scattering fog and clouds to the horizons. You can see more clearly. But when you look, they can look back too. The girl named Maggie went stiff. They're watching and listening. Dang it, I'm gonna have to do something. Padraic reached out, slender fingers to touch her face, and she slapped his hand aside hard. The small impact banished the scene. There was no relief before I saw a fourth image. A girl or a woman swaddled in winter clothes, shouting, pointing. The individual on the receiving end was a rabbit sitting on a snow-covered rock. The rabbit turned, the girl turned to look in the same direction. Bending down, she reached through the snow until she found a stone. She threw it right to the center of the image where I was looking, and it scattered. Another, quickly, after the last. They were starting easier and finishing easier. A weathered, aboriginal woman brushing a young girl's hair with a broad-toothed comb. It might have been an ordinary scene, except it was the dead of night. She picked up a chain, then shackled the younger girl at the wrist. She looked at me, directly at me, then scattered the image with a wave of one hand. And now, finally, a man, sitting on a throne, tall, long-nosed, a long-haired dog at his side. The room at the top of a tower was subject to strong winds, and his long hair blew as the dog's did. A still scene. Quiet, the vision slowly stopping. Below him, the small village sprawled. Jacob's Bell. Except a few things were different. A twisted reflection of the buildings with embellishments and decorations. Arches, steepled roofs, pointed roofs that curled and bent in zigzags, a Baroque image, all lit up in crimson sunset. The other scenes had been at night. The dog looked up. It spoke. "Johans." The man on the throne said. "Hello, stranger. Listen, I don't think you should believe what any of them say about me. If you need help, I can offer it. For a price," the dog added. "For a price," he repeated. "Resist the urge to dismiss what you just saw. You're in a bad enough situation as it stands, friend. Now, do yourself a favor and wake up." I did. I was sitting on the edge of my bed now, panting, gasping. That feeling Molly had described 4 months ago, being surrounded, I could feel it. It was as bad as the strangeness of the visions or whatever those things were. Had I been drugged? Poisoned? Was I ill? I felt my forehead. My hands were shaking. If they'd belonged to someone else, I would have thought they were acting. It looked so exaggerated. Impulsively, I looked over my shoulder. No one and nothing in my studio apartment. No hallucinations, no strangers, nothing to explain. I felt like I had when I'd been homeless, sleeping under the bridge, when there weren't any lights to break up the oppressive darkness. Resist the urge to dismiss what you just saw. I stood up from the bed, staggering for the bathroom. I stopped, the trimmer in my hands gone, every inch the startled prey animal where a sudden crisis leads to utter stillness. My heartbeat felt slow, my gaze was no longer darting here and there. I was making eye contact. It wasn't my face in the mirror above my sink. It wasn't my body. A girl looked at me, her forehead creased in worry. She was wearing a camisole and pajama bottoms. She looked strangely familiar. I had to touch my own chest and face to verify it wasn't my reflection. I was shirtless, wearing different pants. Her movements didn't follow mine. Instead, her fist struck the other side of the mirror. When she spoke, it was only a little muffled. "Run," she said. "Get to the house, now." "What? Which house? Who? Molly's dead," she said. "You're next." The conviction in her voice left me with no doubt she was telling the truth. My voice was thin as I responded. "Molly's dead? She was supposed to call if there was trouble." "Blake, I get it, I do, but you're next, understand? Grandmother made other arrangements, and those arrangements just came into play. The house is in your custody now, and so are all of Grandmother's enemies. Understand? She has a lot. The house is sanctuary, Blake. Molly died because she panicked, and she left the safe ground. Don't make that mistake. Move. Run. But run!" She hit the mirror, and it cracked from the point of impact. Pieces on my end fell, landing on the countertop and sink. I didn't think. I ran.